Okay. Good morning. Good. Hi to everyone. With the time changes, you don't know which time of the day are you in. Hi everybody. Welcome back. And this is the second panel of our IPSA seminar, Smart Cities and Local Open Government. I'm Jose Hernandez. I'm going to be the chair and moderator of this panel. I was saying before that we have problems with time. We need to get out of this hall by 14:10. I don't know how you say it, like 2:10 p.m. at the most. So I'm going to ask everybody that have a presentation to be to try to be short than 10 minutes, maybe 10 minutes will be okay. I'll be marking your time. It's not a pleasant work, but I need to do it. So I'll be sitting like right here and putting my worst face when I see the time going by. Okay, so we have six very interesting presentations today. I enjoyed every one of the papers that were presented. It was really amazing to see how different aspects about open government in local governments. So no further introductions. I want to ask Bastian if you want to present your paper. Bastian is presenting a paper about Chile, uh, who's going to be a really overrepresented country in this panel with two contributions. Bastian.
Thank you, Jose. Hi, everyone. My name is Bastian González Bustamante. I am a DPhil researcher in the Department of Politics and International Relations and St. Hilda's College at the University of Oxford. Furthermore, I'm an instructor professor at the Faculty of Management and Economy at the University of Santiago in Chile. And today I'm going to talk about territorial patterns of open and electronic government in Chilean municipalities and local governments. I'm gonna try to present in 15 or less minutes. This is a work with Diego Aguilar, who is a research associate of Training Data Lab, which is a research group from Oxford, Leiden University, Uni of Santiago in Chile, and Universidad Mayor in Chile also. So next, please. Thank you. First of all, this is the table of contents of this presentation, a brief introduction. Then I'm going to talk about our empirical expectation from the theory of electronic and open government, but also transparency. Then our empirical strategy, which is based on geospatial econometric models, our results, very brief because of the time, and to wrap up a brief discussion also. Next, please. Next, okay. Yes, our main question is what factors determine the development of open and electronic government in Chilean municipalities. So we are combining both concepts. For this, we have constructed an index that combines both elements of a model of e-services in local government portals or websites with transparency indicators for all Chilean municipalities, the 345 between 2019 and 2021. Then we evaluated this, as I mentioned before, with geospatial econometric models. Next, please. Next again. Well, the literature identify a number of factors associated with the success of local e-government. For example, technological infrastructure, characteristic of or size of population, organizational factors or local administrative capacity, and also political factors. We are focusing on the three first dimensions related to infrastructure, population, specifically socioeconomic level, and local administrative capacity. So turning on our empirical expectations. Next, please. About infrastructure, we expect, we are testing this hypothesis that the number of fixed internet connections in a municipal district increases our index. So but there is no consensus about the magnitude of the influence of instructor on digital development and transparency, which could be a little bit weird, but a number of previous researchers haven't found a significant, statistically significant relationship in this variable. Next, please. Our next hypothesis is associated with the socioeconomic level. We focus on the aggregate level measured inversely using monetary poverty indicators, because we are using a small estimation areas from the Chilean government with the United Nations estimations. So our second hypothesis is inverse. A municipal district level of monetary poverty reduces municipalities' development of open e-government because the mayor needs to address other problems of the population. And we focus on financial resources also. So our empirical expectation here is that own revenues of each municipalities should increase our index. And finally, we focus on administrative capacity, specifically the professionalization of the municipal personnel, which should impact on electronic government, but also on the level of adaptation of e-government and innovation. So we are expecting that the level of professionalization of personnel increases the development of the level of our index. Next, please. And next again. Well, we use this well-known e-services model of Esteves, but an update version, because we remove some items and we incorporated additional ones associated, for example, with the use of digital social networks. And we applied the model to Chile's municipalities. We carry out we applied some weights associated with the level of sophistication or digital maturity of each phase or factor in the equation. So next, please. Next, please. This is the model, for example, for factor 1, from factor 1 to factor 5, we can see presence, urine information, interaction, transaction, and the e-democracy, which is very difficult to achieve at the local level in Chile, at least. So as I mentioned before, we remove from items, for example, search engine or the possibility of personalization on the website, in order to incorporate new ones that currently are really important, for example, the digital social networks. So we carry out measurements of municipal e-government, e-services by revising the portals of each municipality in different points of time between 2019 and 2021. And then we incorporated a Freedom of Information Act indicators. Basically, we use an indicator of the average number of working days that each municipality government took to respond transparency requests. So we use weights equivalent to the highest factors of the previous index, F4 and F5. And we achieved Cronbach's alpha above 70% in the regions with over 1 million inhabitants. So it is important to note we carry out some multiple imputations in missing cases, but that was below 5% of cases. So then we merged a number of variables associated with our empirical expectations. This is a figure that represents that because we are using shape files, we are basically the maps, and we merge a number of variables to fit our geospatial econometric models. So we use, for example, our geospatial shape files, number of internet connections from the telecommunications undersecretary, rate of, as I mentioned before, rate of monetary poverty with a small area estimation for all municipalities, indicators of municipal budget with monetary correction, professionalization of personnel, and population indicators from different public sources. And we use, first of all, we use Moran index, which is very similar to the classic and well-known Pearson correlation, but for spatial units, we use one variable under randomization and another one with 10,000 simulation of Monte Carlo with Markov chains. This allows us to identify a perfect dispersion or perfect correlation in terms of territorial patterns. So for this, we use matrices, contiguity matrices based on the sphere of influence model derived from the Lanois triangulation. Next, please. Here we can see, for example, this is the metropolitan region in Santiago, and we can see the different matrices to measure in terms of geospatial econometric models and the influence, the connections between the local governments. We are using, as I mentioned before, the sphere of influence models. Next, please. Then we use OLS models, very, very classic, but run from the shape files. So we are weighting the econometric estimation with our shape files and the connections of the local governments. So we use our previous variables, independent variables, we incorporate them in different models, and we use fixed effects to control a population, estimate population and population density, and we use some logarithmic transformation. Here is the equation. And then we use a couple of spatial autoregressive models to measure the spatial autocorrelation of the dependent variable. This is a very similar equation, but this incorporated a parameter to measure the autocorrelation, and then we measure, next please, the spatial error with a contiguity variable u, which operates like a latent variable. Next, please. We ran a number of robustness checks. We alternate the measures of municipal revenues and with financial dependency, tax collection. We also tested a binary variable of protocol of citizen participation at the local level to carry out some tests associated with the political dimension of the literature. And very quick, here are the results. We detected a weak spatial dependence at the national level, but at the regional level, only 3 regions show significant patterns of autocorrelation: Tarapacá in the north of the country, and Araucanía and Los Lagos in the south of Chile. The metropolitan region, which is the most populous in Chile, has the highest average index, 6.7, of a maximum of 12.5 points. Also Valparaiso, which next in the coast next to metropolitan region of Santiago, showed a high index. Next, here we can see the map. We cannot detect autocorrelation, as I mentioned before, in Santiago. Next, please. And our models. The interesting thing here is that the internet connections are positive and significant, but when we incorporated from model 3 onwards other relevant variables like monetary poverty rate or personal professionalization, municipal revenues, internet connections ceases to be significant. So we ran the models that I mentioned before to measure connections effects adequately. So here we can see a plot of the final model. The two main variables which are significant are poverty rate, which generates a decrease in our index, and municipal revenues, which increase. So here we can see the effect plotted, which makes sense. Uh, a high poverty rate generates a decrease in our index, and all municipality revenues increases the index. Our robustness checks, none of our tests show it to be significant, but the government's financial dependence was significant at 90%, which is consistent because this could be an aspect of weakness in the administrative capacity. To wrap up, very quick, this is a novel open government index because we are combining both concepts. We are combining this an updated e-services model of STEVES and transparency indicators. We detected some spatial autocorrelation at national and subnational levels. We accept the socioeconomic level hypothesis and the financial resources one. Next, please. And we reject the infrastructure and the administrative capacity hypothesis. But the number of internet connections is significant in the absence of other factors, and reveals patterns of spatial autocorrelation, which is interesting because it denotes that the infrastructure is not well distributed in the regions and at the local level. So this is a theoretical, we think this is a theoretical contribution because it implies a combination between open and electronic government, and a methodological and empirical one, which could open new avenues of research. Here in the next slides are the references, and at the end, the full paper has a bit more, and that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Bastian. Bastian, how is it? Bastian. Bastian. All right. Bastian then. Okay, we're moving forward. Next one is Ricardo. Yeah, he's coming this way. Ricardo Rovira. All right. No further introductions, please.
Thank you so much. Okay, I will try to use this. I'm not very used to use this. So, well, hello everybody. I'm a sort of different profile. Maybe I'm mostly an architect, and then later I become a political scientist also. So, and I've been working mostly on voting theory. So all my approaches are a bit different than is usually here, right? Now, I will be brief. One of my main concerns was the definition of democracy in political science is not the same that in voting theory. So this leads to often we see voting procedures implemented as participatory procedures, which does not comply with basic conditions that we deem in voting theory should be considered. Okay, so I'm trying to talk you a bit about this, which could be the reason. So this is, I will be mostly speaking about the conceptualization of democracy. Okay, so one of the common assertions is that increasing citizen participation implies moving forward democracy, but however, some experts do not have checked, they have empiric proof that is not always the case. Sometimes citizen participation can lead to disillusion and then people disengagement. Okay. Also, this may be related with what which other authors have proposed that different underlying paradigms in participation initiatives. Two of the most well-known is this Arstein and I don't know in English, IAPP. Okay, so this Arstein proposed like 8 levels from merely cosmetic, like washing, to actual citizens control, and more or less the IPSA spectrum is more or less the same in that direction, from minimum to maximum power of the citizens. So what actually these scales are implying is how power is distributed between government and citizens, right? So this is actually the etymology of democracy, right? It's citizens and power. That was the way the term was born. No? So let's check a bit of the conceptualization of democracy. When we check the dictionary, we find several definitions of democracy. I borrowed these ones from Norbert, but you just see the dictionary and you will find many other definitions, right? So when you check the particular meanings, they are different. So that's shocking, because we have like it's like we are designating this as a chair and this as a chair, but they are not the same object, right? So much of this confusion or differentiation, when you look back into time, you will trace it to this contribution of this person. He was an Austrian economist. He had a very he changed the meaning of the term, right? Actually, he even asserted in his book, in a chapter which is designated as another theory of democracy, which is very significant. He actually said that before his proposal, the selection of representatives was secondary. The important thing was who made the decision, right? That was the important thing of democracy. But then he said, he also says that he doesn't like that idea. He doesn't like the people taking the decisions. So he proposes, okay, let's change the definition. Let's say that the people has to decide who is going to decide for them. They just have to elect representatives. And he put it that way, right? So this definition, it takes some years, but afterwards it's being accepted by more and more people. In principle, it is a bad evolution of language, right? Because you see the word and the two suffixes, they no longer imply the meaning of the term. So that's very, very strange. But for several reasons, it will be accepted. Even if you go to Montesquieu and all these people, if electing people search the arete, the best people, then what Schumpeter was proposing was closer to aristocracy, right? Okay, now mostly what Schumpeter proposed is what we find now in the scales of participation on the left side, with people having less power, right? What was the etymological meaning is what we find on the right side, right? So when we see participation initiatives ranging on these scales, really we need to clarify what should be understood as democratic participation, right? So if we try to assess the meaning of the term, what we should call like democratic participation, firstly, we can just get Schumpeter's book. He clearly states it. The primary purpose of the democratic arrangement is to best the power of deciding political issues in the electorate, in the people, right? Yeah. Before you were commenting about the relationship between people deliberating and making the actual decision. Well, that's what it was. Exactly that. So this matches the highest participation level in both scales, right? A complementary, another approach, this is something I do with my students in class, is we review the etymology of the term, okay? The term was created ex professo. The words existed, but the term was created in the 15th century. So what I do with them is we represent the political system of Athens, and we use, which is called concepts maps theory. If you draw something, you can then build propositions regarding that scheme. So if we put all the institutions and their relations, every two institutions joined by some arrow, they form a proposition which is true related to this fact, right? So yeah, thank you. So now to make it more clear with some colors, okay, this is more powerful, this is less powerful, okay? And this is a sort of separation that actually existed between the judicial decisions, the executive decisions, and the legislative decisions. So the actual sovereign bodies in Athens, they were all composed by chambers of people, and they were elected, or as Plato said, selected by lot. But they were selected by different rules, which, for instance, this was a representative composition of the whole territory, right? These were not. These were simply elected from a body of 6,000 volunteers, okay? And this was the citizens itself. They could just go. It was like sort of self-selection. Okay, so what we see when we see the graphical representation is that the sovereign decisions of the state were made by chambers with many, because they were many, they could be 500, 1,000, 1,500, randomly elected citizens representing the whole collective. So this large size, if you see a statistical survey right now, you may count with this number to represent 45 million of people, but we have 30,000 of people only, okay? Okay, so what we can say is that it is a sort of proportional representation. I know I'm using modern terms relating to old concepts, but it is a sort of proportional representation. If I choose people by lot, what we are doing is we are representing the features of those people proportionally, and we are also representing their preference structure. Okay, so the decisions these chambers made, they were using the same preference structure than the whole citizens. So if you wanted to have a decision made by the whole citizens, there was no other better way to do it, to achieve it, right? Okay, so when you see the scheme, you see it involved representation. There were representative chambers, there were direct voting, there was deliberation in the assembly. Votes were not counting the votes, but just overall. So there had to be a large majority in favor of actions to be undertaken. So from the very origin, democracy is blended. It has many facets, many different ways. Okay, so we can, furthermore, if you see the scheme, you will find that there are some tools in place to provide the best knowledge is incorporated in the decision, which was very important. Not always they succeeded, but they tried, okay? Okay, many years go by, and a problem in later efforts to implement democratic designs is that lack of efficiency when you try to build something like that in a larger area, right? So we can find something that achieves the same result like in the United States, in Connecticut, like in 17th century, right? So now the scheme has very much changed, but the result is the same. They elect representatives, something which in Athens was very restricted to very few positions. They can make the decisions, right? If we accept the best ones are elected, then this is sort of incorporating the best knowledge. But if a number of citizens, not very large, requested, any decision should be put to a vote. So the same result was achieved. If these people fail to make decisions like approaching the citizens' preferences, then they could request, okay, then let's vote. So this had an incentive to approach citizens' preferences, okay? So we have more or less these 4 areas of democracy also embedded in that system. Okay, voting by this, I'm making a big summary, but voting is standing each time more important. And there are some discoveries that are going to difficult all of this evolution. There are paradoxes appearing, like Condorcet paradox, which is one of the most known, and there are impossibilities. Here we are like fighting, struggling to move forward, but here we get to an end. There are some things that we cannot overcome. Voting cannot ensure a democratic decision is achieved, which is something shocking. There are also interesting results which are not very much known, like this one, the Jurid theorem. This basically says that the Greek were very right when they made very big chambers with a lot of people because you have the higher probability of arriving to a better decision. Okay, so which are the implications of the above? Okay, the first one is that the principles of representation, deliberative, direct, and stealth democracy are perfectly compatible, right? The focus of democracy is on the nature of the decision, on whether it is made according to the structure of values and preferences of the citizens using the best available knowledge. Okay, to achieve the above, several procedures, even a mix of procedures, may be used. The second is that the voting impossibilities mean there is no procedure ensuring a democratic decision is achieved, but we have knowledge to approach those. Vale. Vamos a dejarlo en medio. Bien. Okay, so we have some tools that allow us to approach to a democratic decision, to a decision that is close to the citizens' preferences. Okay. Furthermore, and this is maybe one of the most important issues. I was discussing this presentation with a colleague, an expert of voting theory yesterday. So he said, okay, we cannot overcome these impossibilities, but we can work so all the eligible options have a high quality. Then no matter which option you choose, it will be a good option. Okay, if we don't work on that and all the options we receive or we can choose have low quality, then whichever option we choose, it will be a low quality option. But we can work on this aspect. We can work to try to all the options eligible to be very good options. And so that's like what we should try to achieve in the design of the process, the participation process. We should try to achieve that all the eligible options have high quality, and that all the eligible options agree with citizen preferences and values. Okay, so even the less preferred by the citizens is still an option that has a lot of citizens' preferences. Okay, so I'm not going to keep talking because Jose will kick me out, but what I'm going to say is there are tools in Madrid initiatives. There are some very nice tools used. For example, multiple voting. When I request people, okay, what type of elements do you want to use? When you aggregate all that information, you end up with a very good picture of the overall preferences. Okay. There are also like badly used tools. When you have 30 options, you never have to request people, okay, vote, choose one option. Never. Because what you end up with is very far away from the overall preference. And it's used in Madrid Decide. So they have a combination of good and bad tools. There's some knowledge missing on the fact of voting side. But there is good knowledge in the fact that the competition bases are prepared after requesting the people preferences, because then all the options incorporate some common ground. I think I can leave it here. In the paper, there's more development in case you're interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ricardo, for making it short. He discusses the Madrid Decide initiative very profoundly in his paper, so I welcome you to get to it. We have Lisa presentation right now. You have like 10, 15 minutes, please. I won't be, I hope I'm not being such a pain.
No.
I will be.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'll try to be short. But just to start, I'm Luisa. I'm Luisa Jardim. I'm from Brazil. I have just finished my master in political science at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. And it is a great honor to be here. And I'll be presenting something that came from my master thesis. So actually, the name has changed a little bit from the program because the article that I had, the abstract that I submitted, it turned out to be published. So I wanted to present something new. So what I'll be presenting is called, as an article that is in the folder, is called "The Use of E-Participation in Moments of Catastrophes: A Study of Brazilian City Halls During the COVID-19 Pandemic." I'll be using this just so I don't get lost because I don't have a presentation to share with you. But to explain first the let me just, okay. the time. So to explain the context of this study, the pandemic hit Brazil in February of 2020. The first case was confirmed in the end of the month, in the end of February. In March, we had the health organization saying that it was a pandemic. And in the middle of March, some subnational governments started to implement restriction measures, such as social distancing, the closure of schools, and other measures like that. The COVID came in a moment that Brazil was already facing some democratic crisis, according to different theories of democracy, and also a crisis in the federalism. So just a quick note to explain, we have a federalist system. So we have the federal, we have the state system, we have the state's governments, and we have the local or municipal governments. The crisis had already started in the beginning of Bolsonaro's government, and it was hit by the pandemic and also affected the way the pandemic was conducted. So at first, the federal government was trying to do some actions as other countries were already doing. But when it got really serious, the federal government was a complete disaster. They couldn't guide the country. So the subnational governments started to take action to have the protagonism. At first, this was an organic movement. But after a month, in April, the Supreme Court made a decision that all the subnational governments, they had the autonomy to make decisions, since the federal government was not taking the correct actions or not taking good actions at all. And in this situation, the state governments started to provide general guidelines, and they left autonomy for municipal governments to decide what they were going to do. But there was no way of deciding, because it was a really hard decision, and each municipality had to deal with unpopular decisions. So some of them started to use social participation as a mechanism to take those decisions, to make those decisions. So what I studied in my master thesis and what I'm presenting here is how the municipal governments used social participation during the year of 2020 to tackle the pandemic. So in this article, specifically, what I want to talk about, what I want to discuss is the use of e-participation in tackling the pandemic, based on a mapping that was already published, and also the perception of public servants on why they were using participation and how they felt the process was. So what I'm going to talk about. So at first, the literature review, I'm going to focus on democracy and participation during times of catastrophes. After, I'm going to briefly present the mapping of the initiatives that happened in Brazil in 2020. And then I'm going to present the perception of these public servants based on 10 interviews. So to start, the literature review, we framed the pandemic as a moment of catastrophe. So we have literature, previous literature saying that in times of catastrophes, such as earthquakes, other natural disasters, democracy was not a priority. Surviving was more important than keeping democracies alive. So we have that literature that says that surviving is more important, and that it kind of justifies or tries to comprehend undemocratic actions that can happen during the pandemic. And we saw that happen in different countries. But on the other hand, there are people that say that democracies can help countries to reestablish after catastrophes. So we have that. When we talk about e-participation, we have the same participation in general. We have the same movement. We have people saying that participation is a luxury that can be abandoned in times of catastrophes. And we have people saying that participation actually can guide governments to take better decisions. So we have like this conflict between how democracies and participation survive or act during times of catastrophes. And then we have the digital mechanisms. So other catastrophes had already used digital mechanisms to communicate with the population. But when we have the pandemic, that was even more important because of social distancing, lockdown, and other measures. So the digital mechanisms were already growing in different public services or different areas. And when we have participation in Brazil, most of the initiatives of participation of 2020 were using online mechanisms. So So we present this mapping, the one that was already published. It's a mapping of 104 initiatives that we found in Brazil of local governments using e-participation to tackle the pandemic. What we find out is that most of the initiatives were in the southeast region of Brazil, where São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais, and Espírito Santo are the biggest economies, the biggest population, and everything. And so most of the initiatives were there. Most of the initiatives were also in large municipalities, over 100,000 inhabitants. And most of the initiatives, like the vast majority, were about education, so deciding whether schools should reopen or not. Based on this mapping, I selected 10 cases, 10 municipalities, to conduct interview with the public servants. I say like secretariats, but just to explain, it's like because I know that in English you have like different names for that. So it's kind of, in the federal government, you have Ministry of Health, you have the Minister of Education. In the local government, you have like the head of education, the head of health. So I interviewed those heads of different areas that conducted social participation initiatives. So I've conducted 10 interviews in the first semester of this year to understand why they were using e-participation and what were their perceptions about the usage. So what I found out when conducting this interview was some aspects that confirm what the theory had already said. So there's a part of the theory of participation that says that participation is a good mechanism to understand public problems. So a lot of the public servants confirmed that, but they also said that this was particularly important in the time of COVID, because there was no guide on how to act, on how to face the pandemic, whether schools should reopen or not, whether the other service should keep on working or not. So governments were kind of lost, and the participation was a way that they could also understand the public problems, but legitimize their decisions, because if they say that the decision was shared with the population, they had more legitimacy to make unpopular decisions. The use of the digital mechanisms started out as a challenge, but then after a while, the population was already learning how, because in Brazil we have digital divide stronger than many countries in Europe, I guess. And in the beginning of the pandemic, some people did not have access to smartphones, internet, and besides that, some people had the access but didn't know how to use them. So we have something in Latin America that are the phone companies. They have like this plan that you have access to WhatsApp and Facebook. Yeah, I think that's the same in Chile and many other countries. So people know how to use WhatsApp and Facebook. They don't know how to use like Google. They don't know how to interact digitally. So that's a huge problem for digital participation, because people only interact like through a WhatsApp. That's why we have a lot of misinformation and many other aspects in Latin America. But in the beginning of the pandemic, when they tried to make e-participation initiatives, they said that it was challenging. But after like in the end of 2020, it was already much easier, because people were using the internet for all the services they had to. So it was easier to provide more participatory process, to have more engagement and everything. Regarding the risks of internet, so we have this big discussion on e-participation and digital democracy, about the risks that the internet offers to democracies. But for these public servants, they were only concerned about digital divide. So they used personal data of the population, such as like their opinions, but besides that, like personal data about each citizen, and they were not concerned about the usage of this data, sharing data or anything like that. So the only risk that they were finding out was digital exclusion, digital divide. So in short, we can say that the digital participation was seen as an ally, was seen as a partner for governments during the pandemic. The risks that the literature points out, and that many social movements point out, they were not perceived as risks by the public servants. And in the context of the pandemic, the e-participation was used as a mechanism to understand public problems, to share the responsibility about their decisions, and also to gain more legitimacy to make unpopular decisions. I think I tried to make like a really short version of my article, but the complete article is in the folder, and I hope we have time to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Luisa, for making it so short. It's a wonderful paper. I have some questions for you, but I'll give it to you later. I also have questions for all the papers actually in the table, but we're not gonna make it. I don't think we're gonna make it here. So, Mary, yes, you're up. Mary Francoli. Um,
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to follow you, Luisa, and look at my notes a bit, mostly because I have a bit of jet lag and I have some numbers, so I don't want to forget. I'm Mary Francoli. I come from Carleton University, which is in Ottawa, Canada. Today I'm presenting a paper that I wrote a little while ago with a co-author, Merlin Chatwin. So at the time Merlin was a doctoral candidate I was working with at the University of Western Ontario, which has since been renamed Western Ontario. And now he works for an organization called Open North, which I don't know, maybe some of you doing work on smart cities might have heard of. It does a lot of work on smart cities, open data, and data sovereignty for Indigenous populations in Canada. So something we can talk about more over lunch if you're interested. Our paper is entitled How Local Are Action Plans Submitted by Open Government Partnership Local Participants, so focusing specifically in on the OGP. And the paper builds on an earlier paper that I wrote with Amanda Clark that looks specifically at national level action plans submitted to the Open Government Partnership, and also builds on an earlier one that my co-author Merlin wrote that looked at the first wave of local action plans submitted at the OGP. So in each of those earlier works, myself and my co-authors were curious about the sorts of commitments that ended up in action plans submitted to the OGP, kind of what their framing was and whether or not they were actually addressing the national or the local context when it comes to addressing challenges or barriers to openness. So here you can see our research question. You can just go back one slide. Yeah, sorry, I only have a couple of slides, so it doesn't change too quickly. So the question that guides our paper is, are the action plan commitments of Open Government Partnership local program participants designed to address locally identified problems in a way that's responsive to their unique technological, organizational, and contextual environments? So our paper kind of starts from the assumption that the design of the action plans themselves is important to their impact on successful open government reform and implementation. So you can go to the next one, thanks. So a bit about methodology. We used document analysis to examine a selection of OGP local plans to try to see how local context influenced the individual commitments. In terms of the documents that we looked at for the study, there was, we looked at 15 of 20 OGP plans for local participants in their second cycle. So they had already submitted plans through a first cycle, had gone through the implementation, and had submitted a second round of plans to OGP. So these covered the period of 2018 to 2020. There was 20 plans, or should have been 20 plans. We looked at 15. 3 of the localities didn't submit updated plans in the second round, including my home province of Ontario. We had a change of government. It got a bit more conservative and kind of didn't work out too well. And then there was 2 that weren't available in English translations. So the 15 jurisdictions that we did look at, you can see here on the slide, we were left with a pretty rich and diverse range of geographic and political economic context. So you can change. And then after we did the document analysis, we used a problem-driven iterative adaptation lens as a tool to try and make sense of the documents that we looked at, to try and start getting a better sense of whether the commitments address the local context and whether they were designed in a way that allowed the implementation and the impact to be measured, where the solutions for the problems were actually determined with local stakeholders. So the problem-driven iterative adaptation approach is a lens that was first introduced in 2010 by Pritchard and two colleagues. And essentially, it's an approach that advocates local solutions for local problems and challenges the introduction of externally developed and often international practices as well. So trying to make sure things are happening at the local level. I'm going to kind of motor through it. I don't want to get Jose's bad face, although I suspect it's still pretty friendly. But there's 4 stages of the approach. It starts with, you can kind of see them around the exterior of the circle, problem identification, engaging a network of stakeholders, feedback and iteration, and enabling environment. And we took those and kind of overlaid them with some of the central tenets of open government, including access to information, transparency, public participation, and accountability. So the steps of the approach are on the outside of the circle. I mean, as you can see from the diagram, are certainly not linear. They're very cyclical, and we kind of look at them in reference to the tenets of open government. So what we did to try to get a better sense of the action plans was we used in vivo to run the action plans, and we had a code book that we developed with a number of codes to just try and get a sense of what they were focusing on, what aspects of open government they were looking at. I didn't include the code book here, it just would be too small on a slide, but it can be found in table 2 of our paper. So that gave us a good idea of the various issues being focused on in the plans. That sort of approach obviously does have some limitations. There's some subjectivity when it comes to coding. We did try to mitigate that by having 2 researchers undertake the coding to improve intercoder reliability. And then we also followed up the in vivo analysis with an in-depth person reading each of the plans just to try to check for some accuracy. So I'm going to skip to the next slide, which talks a bit about results. I think that shows up okay on the slide. A full breakdown of the results can be seen here. This is table 3 in our paper. It shows the percentage of text dedicated to each of our codes within the various action plans. So you can see the local governments across the top there. So civic participation was the most prevalent theme in the action plans. It accounted for about 27% of all of the text that we analyzed. We wanted to be careful not to read too much into that because there are some institutional factors that might influence that particular outcome. So, for example, local governments do tend to follow a sort of template when preparing their plans for the open government partnership that prompts them to spend some time talking about certain things, including co-creation and civic participation. So there's that influence of OGP process that happens on the plans. Access to information was the second most common theme, representing close to 15% of our recorded text. And that's a bit of an interesting departure from the earlier study that my co-author Merlin had done that looked at the first round of plans. So it was down from about 7% in the first round of action plans to about 3.5 of coded text here. Similarly, transparency declined in focus. It went from 6% in his study of the first round of action plans to just over 2% in the second study. and co-creation represented just over 22% of all coded text. But it really did vary greatly across the various local government plans that we looked at. So the in-depth reading of the plans that we did following the in vivo analysis allowed us to see how unique contextualized characteristics are built into the plans, and how fewer mentions overall doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't some meaningful reforms that are being undertaken when it comes to transparency, when it comes to accountability, or when it comes to civic participation. So you can skip to the next slide. So I'll just quickly touch on some of the conclusions that we found. One conclusion was that the prioritization of some open government tenets, such as transparency, as I said, which had gone down from an examination of the first round of plans, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could potentially signal that there's been a sort of maturation in the thinking of local governments when it comes to open government in general, and when it comes to their approach to the open government partnership. So it could be that they've learned some valuable lessons having gone through that first cycle of action plans, and the wording of the commitments in the second plans became a bit more specific, a bit more tailored, and a bit more problem-driven in a way that helps for clarification and just helps to address a more specific policy. And then if we return to that problem-driven iterative adaptation lens that I talked about, the circular diagram, we can see in some cases situations where the local solutions to open government problems are not entirely clear. But we can also see some examples where there are local solutions being implemented. So local governments are really committing to address locally relevant problems. We're not having a sort of international overlay onto the local level. But that said, we found that there's still quite a lot of work to be done to identifying open government problems in a way that prioritizes the local, makes sure that it stands out, and also in a way that makes sure that a sort of diverse network of actors or stakeholders are being engaged meaningfully at the local level. We didn't find a lot of evidence that governments were paying too much attention to fostering an environment that would really facilitate ambitious change within their localities. So that's something where there's still some work to be done. And then similarly, many plans lacked detail in general about how change would be monitored or how change would be evaluated as the plans went through an implementation. So looking at the plans and their content as determined by the document analysis and looking at that problem-driven lens does really highlight that there needs to be a sort of better articulation of problems that the commitments in the plan seek to improve, and that the problems need to be related to a specific need that's identified through consultation with local stakeholders. And then second, that the commitments could be designed in a way that are a little bit more flexible, allow for a little bit more wiggle room, if you will, so that activities can be adapted based on ongoing feedback through monitoring and evaluation. So I think I did it. Jose, yes, you can, there's like a thank you slide, but that's the end. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. You didn't get my ugly face, so yeah, you didn't get it. That's great. Thank you. We're now moving to Martin Legris. She's going to present virtually. Martin, hi, from Madrid.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We cannot see you, but we see the presentation.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it's not working. Anyway, the most important is that you get the presentation. So thank you, Jose, and thank you to the team who organized this seminar. I'm Martine Legris. I'm coming from Lille University in France. And today I would like to share with you a working paper I'm actually writing about participatory budgeting, and especially participatory budgeting in France. I will explain that there are several differences between participatory budgeting in France compared to some other countries. Can you please go to the next slide? Thank you. So the main point of the paper is really to go in the empirical study of the steps on organization of the process of participatory budgeting and focusing on the participation mechanisms that are really working at that stage. And especially we have been focusing on what would be a blended mix of online and offline procedures and how this may affect political participation, or at least citizen participation when it shows. And I will also point on the framing that those participatory design online may create during the global process. Can you please go to the next one? So just a kind reminder of what I mean by participatory budgeting. So the main principle you may know already is about how you can make citizens take part in the investment expenditure of their municipality. Here in France, it's not a very large amount. If we look at the last figures about that, we found that it's only 5% of the global budget of the municipalities that are disposed for the participatory budget. So it's mainly a small amount, and of course there are many projects or proposals from the citizens, but there is a harsh selection of the projects, and I will explain how this can happen. So, as you know, the main starting point of the participatory budget was in the city of Porto Alegre in Brazil, a long time ago already. But in France, the method is really different, and I will show you that even if it's still a way of including citizens in the municipalities' choices, it's a very small part of the municipality project, and this very small part is also dedicated to specific kind of projects, mainly environmental projects, infrastructures projects, and some projects about quality of life and transportation. So on one end, those participatory budgets are really including citizens in some part of the municipality or the local government life. But on the other hand, it's also a device that was promoted to build trust between citizens and elected officials. As you know, there is a global crisis in our democracies, and participatory budgets are part of the answers that local governments are actually building. Please go to the next slide. So what are the main research questions? It's more about empowerment. The idea is really to look at different areas of the participatory budget to check if citizens are empowered or not. Do they take decisions or not? So it declines in different subsequent research questions. So you can see them on the screen. And one really important point to understand my paper is also to come back to the notion of participation, we already discussed earlier the notion of democracy, but as well as democracy participation is a concept that is used in several different disciplines and sometimes with different definitions. So when I'm speaking of participation in this paper, is really thought as the possibility to take part to local governments development projects, which means that it goes beyond mere consultation, and of course beyond what we could call simply delegation. Can we go to the next slide, please? So another point I will present in more detail is the mix of online and offline procedures in participatory budget. If you look at the first participatory budget, originally it was materialized in a real group of people. Often they were gathered in neighborhood councils. Today, it's less and less the case, and the main part of the procedure is online. So there are different kind of platforms, and there's a real business on civic tech and platforms designed for participatory devices in general and participatory budget as well. And as you see, there is nearly 80% of the municipalities who have decided to organize a participatory budget who are working online. This participatory budget design in France is not completely defined. It means that when you are living in Paris or if you are living in Lille, you may have different procedures for the same global participatory name, which is participatory budget. For instance, in some municipalities, the ones who are selecting the proposals and deciding which proposal should go to the voting process and which one should not go to the voting process are partly including citizens, and some others are completely closed to citizens, and there are only people from the services of the local cities that are deciding which proposal would be suited to go for the voting process. So there are many other points that can differ from one participatory budget to another, even in France. The main point is that in France, there is no discussion about the rules and the frame of the participatory budget. Citizens can only start to connect and interact inside the participatory budget when it's already completely defined, ruled and designed online. So it means that they only have a passive role inside those participatory budget. Can we go to the next slide, please? So my next coming points will be about citizens' motivation to contribute to the participatory budget. What implies the choice of online participation procedures. And the last point is about a discussion about participatory budget as schools of democracy. I'm referring to a previous work of one of my colleagues in Lille, Julien Talpin. Maybe some of you have heard about it. So I will stop to share my screen, because the next point I will only describe it and present it to you without any support. Okay, so what are the citizens' main motives to contribute to a participatory budget? Mainly, there are three main groups of motivation. The first one is about socializing. Sorry. So it means that some people are really eager to be linked to other inhabitants and discover other people and be in touch with other people and discuss with other people, and so get more and more interlocutors. Some others are motivated by the fact that they are gaining new knowledge. So it's more about the cognitive aspect of the participatory budget, learning about your own city, learning about some NGOs, learning about some new innovation. And the third one is about the fact of participating to the local institutions. So those people are interested in knowing more how the local government are working and how they make choices and why some things are possible and some other are not. So these are the main motive for citizens' participation we found in our own research, and it is in line with most of the literature about participatory budget. So even if we can say that participatory budget are opening local government to citizen views, they also face certain limits. So we follow here some of the literature results that's already pointed the same results. First, despite the efforts of organizers to mobilize participants, usually participatory budgets remain poorly attended. And this is the case in France in several cities. And if you compare it to regular voting or regular polls, it's really, really small. It's around 5 to 6% participation rate. The audience of this participatory budget is also not very representative of the global population. Some groups are really overrepresented. For instance, participants over 50 years old, homeowners, graduates, and political activists are really more willing to participate in this participatory budget. And of course, we have also the usual groups of people who are not included. So just to name them, young people, women, and people coming from other countries. So it means that the decisions taken during the participatory budget process are not really taken by a panel of citizens who could be said a representative of the global population, which means that it can also end up to more exclusion than inclusion in the long time run. What can we say about the social classes that are represented in the participatory budget? No surprise. The working class is not really strongly represented in the process, and there is no real evidence of an increasing of social justice thanks to the participatory budget. So we can say that the main objective of participatory budget seems to be first to open the functioning of the communities to citizen proposals without really empowering them. So what makes the online procedures of participation to the global process? If we compare the first version of some of the participatory budget to the actual version, for instance, we can mention the Paris participatory budget, which really changed from the first version to the new ones. We see that the online procedure is getting more and more developed and more detailed, and that in the way these platforms are designed are really framing some of the actions available to citizens. It means that the tools, instruments, devices that are mobilized contribute to a platform to citizen participation. So digital design can guide choices in some subtle way. For example, you can determine that certain proposal made by citizens be placed more or less high on the website page. So some of them will be more seen than others without real reasons. And this may induce, of course, some bias in the choices. I quote Romain Badois in my paper. He's been looking at local open government online platforms in France, and he also points the same kind of difficulties about the induced framing of the context and of the possibility to interact on those platforms, and that those design may really structure the result of the poll.
Martin,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are running out of time. Sorry.
Okay, so I will just wrap up about the idea of schools of democracy. So you will see on my paper that I'm referring to previous work on that topic. The idea was to understand if those participatory budgets are really learning spaces for participation and for political participation, if possible. And the finding is that it's of course more inclusive than other participatory devices. For instance, we see that young people are more present on that kind of platform. But on the other hand, it seems to favor citizenship more than real participation, which means that there is less sharing and deliberative process than, in fact, individual discussions and individual projects. So there is seldom linkages to open government practices. And if learning processes are active, they are still very narrow. So it leads to a discussion I cannot present today, but about what would be a major deliberative step in the preservation of collective discussion and deliberation rather than online individualistic views on participation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Martin. Sorry to interrupt. We have little time. We need to close this room by 2:10, and we have 15 minutes. And I wanted to present my paper and maybe give some little points, maybe questions more than points to it. We can have the discussion on the lunch break. Well, my presentation is a paper that is undergoing. Actually, it's a research we have been doing it for about a year and a half, something like that. But it's much more it's larger because we have been studying precisely local governments in Chile. And the ask is who's asking for public information. And what we want to do with this presentation is actually to see what variables can predict the usage of FOIA acts, through FOIA requests. Okay, just for introduction, really quickly. When we talk about FOIA, for Freedom of Information Acts and open government, we assume in some points two things: that FOIA is going to be implemented by governments, and that people are going to use that information for collaboration, transparency, not only for transparency but collaboration and deliberation in governments. And these two assumptions may be like the center of what we see in theoretical writing about open government, that governments will open the government and that people will use that openness to collaborate. Uh, and in some points we have saw that in predicting FOIA implementation, there's been a lot of writing from government's point of view, but not much about FOIA usage from the way of people maybe interact with that and how FOIA can become a participatory alternative for local government, well, for from citizens in local governments. And that is the and that's the point. That was our main question: was what variables could predict that a municipality receive a large number of FOIA requests against another one that doesn't have any FOIA requests sent by their citizens. Next, please. So we had one dependent variable, that's the number of FOIA requests to local governments in Chile. We can do that because there's a, well, I'm going to talk about Chile later, but we can do that because there's a centralized system of FOIA requests in Chile, precisely. So we use the number of FOIA requests to local governments. We understand that most requests, it implies that it's more usage. And we use a set of variables, independent variables. We divided into institutional supply, that is variables um, that define local government. And civic demand is what defines social or citizenry, local citizenry. Sorry. And these both variables can be divided between two kind of sub levels. That is agency variables. That is what people does, the action that people does, and structure variables. That's things that are based on structure, on socioeconomic characteristic of any of each territory. So we place it like this, and we put some variables in this table. This is table one from the paper. We say political leadership and participatory institutions in supply size in agency and structure and in supply size in financial autonomy. In demand, we have strength of local civil society and socioeconomical local context. Next, please. And with this, we propose 5 hypotheses that we wanted to check with data that we had. The first hypothesis is that it's about political leadership. There's a lot of thinking about that leftist governments are actually like the ones who are more promoted or more that promote participation more than right-wing governments. That is the first hypothesis, that maybe leftist governments will have a bigger number of FOIA requests. The second hypothesis is that municipalities that have implemented participatory institutions may have a lot of FOIA requests, that maybe they are willing to engage with people, and that people will take care of that willingness, that political will to engage with the communities, with their governments. I'm sorry. The third hypothesis is that that is from the demand side. This is from the agency supplies, agency supply size. They're both from that aspect. From agency, but demand size will be in the municipality, or the number of CSO or civil society organizations that are formally established in that community. We're thinking that the number of people will show willingness of participating in social debate, and that if we have a big number of CSOs in the community, there'll be a high number of FOIA requests. The fourth, and this is structure from the supply side, that municipality with high levels of financial autonomy, as said, there's a lot of research about this, that financial autonomy is basically a basis for open government, participatory, and transparency implementation. So we are thinking that maybe that implementation will be also, that can be explained, that this kind of thing can also explain that people interact with their government from the citizen side. And the fifth hypothesis is that municipalities with high socioeconomic characteristics may have a higher number because people are more educated, have more capacity to engage with local governments. And we tested this. Next slide. We okay. I'm gonna skip that because I already. And we tested with well. This is the description for the model that we made. We made a it's called a binary linear. I'm sorry, my English is turning. All right. Sorry, I'm so sorry. If you put it the next one, yeah, binary regression model. I'm sorry. You already got it, but I was stuck a little bit. But we got, maybe we can go back, please. We use data from local governments. We use to see, well, what we did is the FOIA request. We split it in a dummy variable. We made 1 and 0, and 1 playing a high number of FOIA requests, and 0 and low level of FOIA requests, basically because we had a lot of we wanted to short it because the variance was really high, so we wanted to short it up. That was a methodological important decision that we made. And then we try to cross it with the independent variables that I already mentioned, and we put a control one. There's a characteristic in local governments in Chile is that they there's a corporation figure. This is kind of a figure, a private figure that sometimes does presents a lot of social services, mostly education and public health. So now, yep. So this is the model that we run. As you can see, the first relation, the biggest relationship was with civil society, and counterintuitive, the dependence, which is financial dependence, low income or low autonomy, low financial autonomy of the municipality, and it worked in a negative way. But these two variables were the one that showed, the main one, the existence of civil society organizations at the local level. And well, the main predictor is that we saw with this exercise was that mobilized civil society in the jurisdiction may predict the usage of FOIA requests to a local government. That means, that goes along with some early findings by Worthy in 2013 that said that FOIA requests and FOIA acts can promote and empower people that are already mobilized, but it's not an evidence that it can create new participation, which is a very big point because, as I said, it's one of the biggest assumptions in open government, that if you put it outside the information, people will use it. We see that demand side factors are determinant in this kind of logic because we are trying to see what demand, what FOIA usage is. That is the two sides of the same coin because mostly supply side factors can determine implementation. Yeah, but from the demand sides is, well, obviously maybe demand side factors are very, very determinant. And the final point is that we maybe are trying to, because most of people that try to measure open government at the local level try to measure it by the implementation, by how governments implement this transparency and participatory institutions. But that doesn't mean that automatically will have an actual change, because that doesn't, the evidence that we see here is that it doesn't correlate with usage of this kind of acts, of these kinds of law. So maybe formal changes do not automatically came and become changes in local governance, which makes perfect sense, but it has to be a thing to watch. And thank you. I think I passed. Okay, we're just about time. I've had like a bunch of questions for each of you that I cannot do because we need to get out. Estamos a la hora, ¿no? Okay, they given me 5 minutes that 2 minutes that I'm gonna use to make only some comments to the papers that were shown in this panel. I hope that Norbert can, and maybe we can discuss the early panel at the lunchtime. Um, as a general thing, maybe you can take that. Oh. Okay. As a general thing, I see that most of the papers have a critical view, a point of view with participation, which is, I think, is awesome, because it is sometimes an automatical idea to think that participation by itself can conduce to better democracy. That's why I really like both works from Ricardo and from Martin. They are questioning, that participation is not only because there are participatory mechanisms that we have a better democracy, that there's a lot of things that can influence that. The one that made me have more questions was your work, Ricardo, because I was thinking about, well, is more participation is more democratic? Is voting the only way to participate? Do we vote rationally? How do we balance technical and democratical reasons for? Because you didn't show it here, but you work on a specific case in Madrid Decide. And it's a lot of questions that is really good that we are asking ourselves about that. From Chile, Bastian, I really enjoy your paper. Really enjoy it. It took me a while to understand fully what you were saying because of the technicalities. I suppose you're a geographer. You work on geography. You're political science, just as me. But it was a point when the georeferencing that it just confused me a little bit. But I wanted to ask you why you choose those variables. Why those variables and those specific things? Because when I saw the paper about transparency, I said, but why the number of days to respond could be like a transparency variable? There can be like a lot of more. So the why of that was a little thing. I say that, yeah, richer municipalities and richer communes can have better infrastructure, have better equipment, and can better open up to the public, and that's a good result that you have. But and I wanted to know what would you change, what would you improve from your analysis? But maybe we can talk about that later on. Mary, I just wanted to ask you. This is a paper from the past way of making the plans. The OGP local change its figure. What do you think about how it's going to be with the new changes? is it going to be more related to the subjects in local to a local subject? So it's going to be a mess. Maybe it can be a mess. Nobody knows about that. What do you think about it? It's a question that I do have. I don't mean to put you in the spotlight with that. I really enjoyed your paper, Luisa. It was really nice. And it was really clear. And you presented like really. I really wanted to read the one you got published now. After I read this one, and it is a point that both Ricardo and Martin made is that this tension between legitimacy and technical results now, because basically a catastrophic disaster or something like this, you need to be quick in your assessments, and because lives are on the line. So yes, I wanted to say to think what about legitimacy, but also what about panic? People can get to panic and start asking for things that are not technically the best way to go. We saw that in many countries. Well, in Chile, we saw that. And sometimes people were asking for things, and then 5 minutes later was asking the other side, and everybody saying like they want to kill us and stuff like this. What happens when panic hits in a catastrophic issue? And yeah, Martin, I was my main question was what would you think was the future of participatory budgeting, because you were really critic about this, which I'm all for it. But I was thinking if you could expose a little bit more about what are the future then. Is it a past thing? We have come beside. I don't know how you say it in English, but is it the end of participatory budgeting? Is it the decline is over, and now we have to pass to another thing? Well, I was thinking about asking you about your reflections on that, but we don't have time for your responses. So I just wanted to plant this. Norbert, you want to say something for the closure? I wanted to thank everybody to stay over here, and we're going to put this on YouTube so everybody can see it.
Yeah, I want to thank Leonard and Filippi and Martin, who are still around. Thanks a lot. I mean, I had the chance for some of you to, after the presentation, I could give some comments. Anyway, I was approached by the Springer publisher, and there is a book series on studies on digital politics and governance, and they are interested in our topics. They saw the announcement of the workshop. So if there is interest, I mean, let me know. I mean, I think we can add one or two or papers, and then it could be an option. So stay on board. Use the website. The RC5 has a website. Please go at that. And we have, more important, we have also an email list. That's where when you want to be updated what's going on, stay on, join this email list as well. I mean, there's not too much coming to you, but there is some mail coming. So, but finally, I want to thank you, all of you. We have now the chance to have lunch together and discuss it. Again, thanks to the participant online, and a lot of thanks to Jose, I mean, because you did a wonderful job again. I mean, and of course, also our lady behind the screen. Thanks for the organizers. That was really great work you did. And thank you, Jose.
Thank you. Well, we need to go because I actually have to be here in 45 minutes. So
yeah.
So let's go and have some lunch. I'm sorry. Yeah. So let's go and have some lunch. Right. Goodbye. Thank you.